Perfect. I think we're good. Yeah, so again, we're starting off by showing this slide about the writing process. As I said, it's a slide that I like to show a lot because I think it's a helpful reminder. Often when we kind of get stuck into writing, we tend to think about it in very linear terms, doing the research, writing up a draft, and getting the final product. But it's often helpful to remember that basically it is an iterative process. You're going to be doing certain steps in that process quite a bit. You might do an initial research and looking for sources and start setting out your reference library like we talked about in our first workshop. Do a little bit of writing and realize you need to come back and look for more things. When you start drafting, you get a first draft in, you get feedback from your supervisor or advisor, and you have to rewrite certain sections and you start thinking through a process a little bit more. So it's helpful to kind of give us little checkpoints to kind of remind ourselves that it doesn't have to be a straightforward process, and that's okay. Many of the workshops that we've covered this term deal with these initial stages of the pre-writing process. So we've looked at how do you get resources, how do you start setting up a reference library and think about referencing. Laura has talked about basically note making and how do you kind of create a little bit of a workflow from the information that you're getting into basically distilling that information with an eye towards looking towards it forward. Also speed reading and critical analysis reading. How do you work your way through certain documents? What are you looking for? Are you reading with a purpose? And that's to kind of help save you some time. So today we're a little bit more in terms of areas of drafting and thinking about basically reader expectations and things that can help you as you work with your reading. So it's helpful to kind of start then by defining what academic writing is. And it's difficult to kind of have this all-encompassing definition, but some common features of academic writing is that it's planned and focused. It answers basically the questions and demonstrates an understanding of your subject. It is structured, and I mean that it's coherent, it's written in a logical order, it brings together related points and material. It's also argumentative, and that means it's built up by evidence and reasoning, either from your own thoughts or incorporating the ideas of others to help support that. And it's also somewhat formal in tone. It uses the appropriate language and tenses, and it's clear, concise, and balanced. So in thinking about academic writing, it's helpful to think about it through to kind of three different lenses. So writing as thinking. And what I mean to say is that as you're writing, you are thinking, and writing helps you to kind of clarify your thoughts. You're connecting ideas that you gain from reading or researching, and you're trying to find your own voice. So one way to think about it is that doesn't have to be perfect on the first time coming out. Use it as a type of basically thinking mechanism to clarify your thoughts. Another way to think about writing is writing as a type of conversation. As emerging scholars, graduate writers, undergraduates as well, you'll want to view writing as an opportunity to participate in an ongoing scholarly dialogue with others in your field. And at this level, you're being asked to make and defend arguments through your writing. And it's important to recognize how your arguments can engage with, contribute to, and add the existing scholarship in your field and study. And successfully entering into that conversation requires you to have a type of knowledge of expected conventions, such as those that are related to vocabulary choices. How do you kind of get into an argument? How do you organize your document? And as I said, know a little bit more of the stylistic conventions of your subject there. And last but not least, thinking about writing as a process. So as I kind of alluded to in the beginning slide, it's more than just a product. It includes everything from note making, reading, composing, revising, and having a bit of a proofreading process that occurs to get to that final product that you kind of produce at the end. And at this point, you'll realize that this concept of research aspect of your project and the writing up of your project are not two separate things, but actually one part of a larger process. And in this process, you're kind of developing your ideas as well. So position yourself as an academic writer. There are pretty much 6 areas you want to consider as you're kind of emerging as an academic writer. Audience, purpose and strategy, organization, flow, style, and presentation. So looking first at the audience, in many cases, it's helpful to to think as you're writing of somebody firmly in mind as you plan, compose, reviews, and edit your writing. So think about the manner in which your assessor or your reader will read your work. And while your assessor will have more subject knowledge than you, they'll want the way that they read your work is going to be different than the way that they read the work of a researcher in the field. So they will want to check that you have understood a concept related to the subject matter. And the only way they can do that is if you make that kind of clear in your writing. So it might be helpful to think of your reader at this point as another student with slightly more advanced level than you, and they require you to really explain yourself to see that you properly understood what you're writing about. So some helpful questions that you could ask yourself is, what does your audience need? What do they want from your writing, and what do they value? What's most important to them? And what are they likely least to care about in your writing? What type of organization would be best helpful for your audience to understand what you're trying to say? And what do you have to say? Or what are you doing in your research that might surprise your audience? So these are some type of things to think about as you're considering audience. So purpose and strategy then, apart from the questions that we've asked, is basically, what do you want your reader to gain from reading your work? And this can be a bit of reflective practice as you're thinking about it. And attempting to answer this question may help you focus your arguments into the points that you're writing. So for example, it's defined by your audience, again, purpose and strategy. Some questions to think about: why has this lecturer or supervisor set this assignment? And what is the purpose of this research project here? So in thinking about organization then, I will come out and say it from the very beginning, there's not a magic organization that's going to fit writing across all of the disciplines. So how you organize your writing will depend in part by the audience and the purpose that you're writing for. So again, you can think about this reflective process that's a bit circular here. But in general, readers expect that academic writing will present an argument in some type of logical and consistent manner across the writing project. And again, how that argument looks will somewhat be dependent on the conventions of your subject matter. But thinking about organization, we might say on a global scale, this could be something at the level of an undergraduate research project. It could be something as a supervision essay or an essay that you do for your master's project. More on a local level, when we think about organization, it could be something about the section of a project. How does your literature review look? How does your methods look? It could be on the level of paragraph, or even on the sentence. If you're thinking about flow and clarity, thinking about how your sentences are organized can help you think about organization as well. So a helpful metaphor that I always kind of go back to is in thinking about structure and organization is the metaphor of the hourglass. So you'll see from the picture on this slide that the hourglass, how it's kind of shaped, it begins really wide and then at the top, and then it kind of funnels down towards the middle, and then on the opposite side it comes out wider again. And in many ways, the movement or the shape of this type of hourglass recreates a general shape of how an academic essay or even a project should be organized as it leads your reader through the paper. So you have an introduction. It often begins really wide by setting context of the paper. Then it starts to really focus down to the thesis statement or your main argument. Then you have the body paragraphs, and this is that thinner spot here, and they often work as what we call building blocks of your argument, or as Inger Mewburn, she often references them as chunks of thinking. And it's really here in your writing where it focuses on your argument. And essentially what the paragraphs are doing is that they're meant to help your reader see the development of your argument in a logical, structured manner. And then you have the conclusion of your work, which then starts this widening out process again, where you return your reader to some of the central topics that you've talked about your paper and some future considerations. So looking a little bit more closely then at introductions, there are three key moves that introductions should do. And one of them is basically give a relevant background. And this doesn't mean necessarily a genealogy of ideas from the beginning of recorded history, but rather a soundbite that helps to orient your reader to the general topic that you're going to cover. And this should be followed by a second move, which is basically stating the problem, giving a summary of a particular problem that you hope to address, then followed by your response to that problem, which is basically your statement or of your argument in the miniature sense. You may be familiar with this type of miniature argument as either a thesis statement, other scholars call it some other things, the main idea, but that's pretty much where you're kind of going for. And other characteristics of a strong introduction, and you don't need to fit all of them in, but these are some things that you can consider, is that they give a brief synopsis of the relevant literature, they indicate a problem or a controversy in the field, they establish the desirability of the research, they list some of the research questions or hypotheses, and this is here we're starting to think about bigger research projects here. They explain the significance of the value of the study, and they define certain key terms that might be really important for the reader to know upfront to see how you're using those key terms as well. So moving on to paragraphs again, you may be familiar with some of these acronyms that have been used. So you have TEAL, which is topic, evidence, evaluate, link, or PEAL, point, evidence, exploration, link. You have TEXES as well, or PI, point, information, explanation. And while you might think of academic paragraphs, they're a little bit more sophisticated than these acronyms. They are helpful to give you a sense of the type of rhetorical moves that should be happening in your paragraphs. So some of these moves include giving a topic sentence to let your reader know what is your paragraph about, explaining the step in your argument that you're making in your own words, giving evidence to show that your point isn't just your opinion, that you're using and explaining evidence in conjunction with other pieces that you may have introduced, or how is basically the thing that you're talking about impacted by analysis, theory, or context. And then, of course, you want to signal what's happening, signposting, and things like that. And I always say paragraphs, they're not like a mystery novel. So a mystery novel will give you something and keep you in suspense until the very end. And then you go, aha, this is the killer, especially if you like Clue. Was it Colonel Mustard in the library with a candlestick? No, you have to help your reader up front know what is this paragraph about? Why am I reading this? And so thinking about paragraphs then as these type of mini arguments or chunks of thinking can help you structure then your paragraph, and we might even say your larger piece in a whole. Then we think about the conclusions. So again, we return to the questions that the problem basically has outlined. We revisit your argument to enable your reader to check, did you do what you set out to do, that you promised? And you want, on larger projects, highlight any limitations, basically to your analysis, and then broaden out to connect with your answers to a bigger picture for further research. So thinking then about flow, so part of the difficulties in writing when people think about flow is your writing could be choppy. And what I mean by choppy is really stilted, staccato-like, basically sentences that might often inhibit your reader from understanding what you're trying to say or confuse your reader here. And another metaphor that I found really funny was from, I forget which professor, but they said, when I read a paper, it should be like going down a slide. So I climb up the stairs. This is a bit of an effort. I go through the reading process down the slide. And if I've liked it, I want to go back in line and get on the slide again. So that's a nice little image to think about that. And one of the ways that we help our readers kind of work through our writing is by signposting here. So you give little signals of where you're going, what are you doing, to help your reader think through your ideas. And there's a wonderful resource here, which is when we circulate the slides, we'll have this hyperlinked. It's the Manchester Academic Phrase Bank, and that has a lot of ways of helping you think about words, how to signpost, how to move your reader through certain different sections of your text. So I would definitely recommend that, and it's going to make another appearance when we talk about templates a little bit later. So in thinking about style, when we're thinking about style, we're thinking essentially about some of the smallest units of your writing and the level of your sentence. And here we want to play close attention to the way words convey meaning in a sentence. And for this, we need to think about first how it's structured. So we can go back to some of the very basic elements, such as a subject, a verb, the way clauses work in sections of your sentences to kind of create meaning. Some things that can make sentences difficult to read. So run-on sentences, where there's too many sections in your sentences, or confusing and unclear subjects. Some of you may have heard never start with this, your sentence was this, because it needs to refer to something. That being said, spell checkers and grammar checkers can really help to kind of alleviate some of these pressures. But one thing I would make a caution is that they're not really helpful when it comes to academic stylistic suggestions that can help you with the grammar. But in terms of how you structure your writing in an academic sense, it might not be quite so well. Also, in thinking about word choice, consider basically different types of Latinate versions of your words as opposed to more colloquials. So you might say, for example, inquire versus asks around, or investigates instead of checks out. And so this will all in a certain sense have some type of bearing on the clarity of your text. So also beware of jargon and unclear terms in your writing. And there is a bit of a myth in academic writing that it needs to be purposefully and unnecessarily complex, filled with jargon to be more academic. And depending on your field, if you're reading certain theorists, especially postmodern theorists, you might say, aha, I should be writing like Derrida or Foucault, that talks about the signified signifier and basically signification of the signifier. What does that mean? And so I've given you a bit of a text, basically, of a text that is written with a lot of jargon here. And I'll give you time to work through this while I'm talking. But there is a growing movement by scholars, and especially a movement now in academia, that your research needs to be understandable not only to specialists, but non-specialists alike. There is a thing about making research more accessible and your writing more accessible. So if we look at something like this, the work of the text is to literalize the signifiers of the first encounter, dismantling the ideal of an idol. In this literalization, the idolatrous deception of the first moment becomes readable. The ideal will reveal itself to be an idol. Step by step, the ideal is pursued by a devouring doppelganger, tearing apart all transcendence. This de-idealization follows a path of reification, or to invoke Augustine, the path of carnalization of the spiritual. That's a pretty heavy text there. What does it mean? And we can kind of grasp at it, but there are some things here that seem to kind of complicate the meaning. What does it to literalize the signifiers mean? Or devouring doppelganger, tearing apart all transcendence. This de-idealization follows the path of reification. So if we're trying to ask, what does this text mean? You can see how this type of sense of jargon, or basically what Helen Sword calls zombie nominalization, sometimes kind of really interfere with what our readers are trying to get from a text. And this leads us often to basically proof presentation. And at this point, we've been focusing a lot basically on how you structure and arguments, and it can be easy to kind of say, well, isn't it just about the context? And not really, because when you get to a certain level, basically you'll want to show that you have some type of respect for your reader. And showing that basically means basically that you proofread your text for any type of errors. Now, there is a difference between revising and proofreading. So revising, you might think about in terms of an apartment. You've bought an apartment, you don't like the way a wall looks, and you want to basically break it down to have a more open floor plan. That's revising, where you go back and you just rearrange, or you work on large sections of text that have meaning in your work. Proofreading would be, I don't really like the color of this wall because it's a bit cold. I want to go for more warmer scents. So proofreading is on this very surface level type of thing, but it's a surface level that can have an intense, meaning for your reader, especially if there's something that's kind of jarring and doesn't allow your reader to kind of get through and understand your arguments here. So I've given you a very short list of some proofreading techniques that you could use for yourself. So work from a printed copy. This can be really good because it helps with our comprehension. It allows us to interact with our reading on a more tactile level. Read your work out loud. And often, for example, for myself, I find that when I do that, there will be certain places where I naturally want to pause and maybe I've just gone off on a thought that's a little bit too much. I've tried to really have this run-on thought. It makes me stop and pause. It's like, okay, do I need a different type of punctuation there? Why am I running out of breath? Read with a ruler. And this will help you as you kind of read down the page with a ruler, keep you from skipping ahead, because our mind has a wonderful ability to autocorrect in certain senses. And so the ruler keeps us really focused on what's in front of us in the line. For those of you that don't want to print out, use the text-to-speech function on an electronic copy. Most words on most word programs, they have a text-to-speech function, and you can basically have somebody read it back to you. You can hear it, and you can interact with your text in a different sense. You can also adjust the speed. You can isolate certain sections with that. And then also enlist the help of others. Have other people read your work. A friend is always a perfect, basically, person to help read, because they may have some sense of what you're working on, but not complete sense. So you can always check their reactions to basically what you've written. So now we're going to move on a little bit to basically what some of the other strategies that might be helpful as you're writing. So when we often think about, when we reflect on the writing process, we often think about, like, there's a certain type of steps that we go through. We start with an input, so we have source material that we're working with, and then something happens and we have a draft of our paper. And really, templates are at least an attempt to understand, to think about, and help control and give a little bit of form to what can often be a very frantic, exciting, interconnected, but also shape-shifting process that happens in this middle type of a step here. So when we talk about templates, they are a specific set of containers that you make in advance to kind of fill in your writing with. So this might look like an outline. It might look like having a document with headings and subheadings. It could look like a bunch of Post-it notes on your walls. Templates can be a little bit flexible in a way. But the idea is that you say in advance, here are our set of basically containers that I would like to fill up, and whether that is an introduction or case study or anecdote, and I'll fill that container up with a bit of writing. So that's another way. Another helpful thing about templates, they also give us boundaries in our writing. The work that we can do can often expand to whatever type of container we try to fit it into. For example, if you say, okay, I'm going to spend next 20 minutes reading this work here, and then how many times has it happened that you sit down, you really get into a book, and all of a sudden you look up and you're 15 minutes basically in. So that type of thing has expanded. So they keep it a little bit more closer to the research project. Then let's say you've started to do a literature search for your research project, and basically you set out to find a couple of resources there. And then all of a sudden you've walked away with pages of Excel spreadsheets from a database. So whatever we're doing can easily expand to fit this type of conceptual container that we've started off with here. So templates can help us think ahead of exactly what we need and when will we know that it's good enough to move on to the next stage here. And that can be important because we can always get stuck in more reading. I am a serial person that thinks I need to read everything on a topic before I can even move on to the next topic. So by having a conceptual template, it can say, wait a second, it's time. I think I have enough now. I should start writing here. So one of the reasons many of us then can struggle with the early stage of writing is because it's difficult and extremely difficult to create something that we've never seen before in our lives. So some of you that may be in the postgrad, this might be the first time that you're writing a master's dissertation. Those of you doing PhDs, first time writing a PhD, how are you going to do it if you haven't done it before? And this is where templates can come in handy. So in my own experience, I just finished an MA in library and information services management. And when I was at the writing stage, I thought it was incredibly difficult. It's like, what does an MA look like in the library field? It's considered social science. I'm coming from an English background. What goes into that type of dissertation? So one of the things I did is I looked at my school's dissertation, basically bank, and basically I looked at some really interesting dissertations, people that I knew had gone on to published, and I looked at the form. So what did they have in a literature review section? What was in the methods section? And this was really helpful then as I was thinking about constructing my own dissertation of okay, this person had this many basically sources that they did a literature review in. Okay, about that point, it doesn't need to be perfect, but it gives you a general sense of what you need. So step one in the template process is to find an example. And I guess that's where I'm leading up to. This can be a bit more complicated in some situations than another, but two resources that are great for finding previous dissertations or theses is ProQuest dissertations and theses and networked digital library and theses. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to try to click there, and I'm going to show you where. And I will share my screen with you. So if you click that link that I've shown, just move here, it will take you to this LibGuide on physical and digital collections. And here, if you're writing a dissertation or thesis, is a great, as I said, a great resource to do that. You have ESOs, but that's down right now from the British Library. But if you go to this one here, and where you'll want to search for that, okay, thank you, is right up here where it says search in, drop down there, and you'll want to go to ProQuest dissertations and thesis citations. If you click there, now you can say, I want to search on the topic of Gothic literature. And what it will do is it will give you basically publication years. It will give you the different types of degree, so doctoral or master's, dissertation subjects, so it can break it down. And in most cases, it's a great way to kind of find other projects that have gone before you and get a general sense of what's in there. How do you structure some certain things? So if we click on that, I think, see more data fields, you can see basically the abstract. Some of them, they do allow you to download them. Yes. And you have access to, okay, a lot of pop-ups now on these things. So you have access to the dissertation, which you can then basically download here. And as I said, it's a great way to start to get some sense of the templates that you want to try to create. So let me see if I present in Teams again. Yes. You might say, well, I'm an undergraduate. We don't necessarily have these type of databases for undergraduate supervision essays. So yes, I would say then this is a great time to actually use your own work as a template. So you go back to your supervisor's feedback, look at for some of the sections in your supervision essay that actually did really well, and then think about what went well in that section and think about how that works. And this leads us then to basically this notion of reverse outlining, not for basically content, but for function. So in many cases, basically, when we think about reverse outlining, we think about trying to, especially if we're looking for templates, it can be easy to say, okay, so I'm working in 19th century Gothic fiction. I need a template. Basically, I need an example of something in 19th century Gothic fiction. Well, if I'm working with letters in Gothic fiction, that could be a very, very specific needle in a very big haystack, what I'm trying to look for. So let's say if I'm writing a grant proposal, then I would want to look, for example, or say, okay, this person might not be writing completely on basically what I'm writing about. Maybe it's somewhat a different topic, but functionally, what they're doing is the same thing in terms of a grant proposal. They're taking a study that they've already piloted, they're expanding it out for more research. And so whether or not their research is on, for example, snails, and my research is on iPads, it doesn't really matter because what they're doing is they're doing the same moves or the same actions in this type of basically example that I'm looking for. And We'll get a little bit more into what those actions might look like, but what you find in the example is that you doesn't need to be a perfect fit for content. It doesn't need to be a perfect fit for necessary function, but something close, because basically by reversing for outline, you're seeing basically what are some of the moves that this person's made. So in a certain sense, you're using the outline not as basically a type of note capturing type of thing that's trying to be predictive of the text that you're going to write, but actually is basically this type of content, this type of functional basically capture, so that you can then recreate for yourself. So the metaphor that I always tend to think about when you're working then with source material is then basically when you're cooking, you can often start with ingredients, and sometimes you start with a recipe. So if any of us have been basically in charge of basically cooking for ourselves, maybe our first time in the university alone, or basically moved away, you can often know that sometimes dinner might start with basically looking in the pantry, looking in the fridge, and what do we have? And that's dinner. So in this case, basically it's pasta, a jar of pasta sauce and some mincemeat. Guess we're having pasta bolognese tonight. Uh, Another way to think about it is you can start with recipes. So if I'm really extremely hungry for, let's say, nachos, what am I going to look for? I'm looking for basically the ingredients: chips, cheese, jalapenos, whatever else makes your nacho recipe really special. And often with writing, we assume that it has to be one or the other. And different people can basically have different feelings on this type of things. But sometimes you feel that you're expected to immerse yourself in the research and then decide what you're going to do, make from it from then. And then you end up with 70 boxes of things from an archive and say, okay, make a dissertation. How can I do that if I've never cooked before? So to kind of keep this metaphor going, it can be really overwhelming if you haven't cooked before. It's like, okay, eggs, flour, cocoa powder, make a chocolate cake. And some things don't work like that sometimes. So it'd be helpful to have a bit of a recipe here. And I think that templates here help us to organize, to keep this metaphor going, our ingredients, our resources. And that's what we're starting with. And the recipes will help us sort and break down what we need to hunt down for from what we have. So if you're a person that likes outlines already, templates are a great tool. They can act for you as a type of Mad Lib search. And then maybe that's really, really before your time, but Mad Libs, it used to be like this type of story that would have blanks in it, and then underneath the space you would have like a function. So say fill it in with an adverb or a noun or a name here, and you would start filling it out, and then at the end you kind of get like basically you could almost get a quite humorous story. So in a certain sense, it's a little bit like that, but it helps you basically think about what do you need to put in at that point. So okay, if maybe I'm working on a research project. Okay, I need 2 case studies here to fill out this chapter. I need a set of sections that intersperse the literature here. I need 2 paragraphs about what the stakes are in this research. And then I need a really punchy conclusion. So you might say, okay, I need to have 2 pages then. Let's say you're writing a scene of a novel. I want 1 page where they go on an excursion. Then I want 3 pages about the type of fallout that happens on this journey. So it's a way to start looking for what you need in a really big pile of what you have already. And it'll probably definitely need to be read. It will need some polishing, but you don't. The great thing is you don't have to invent these type of things from scratch. And I think the importance of basically the templates. And here I want to also go back to the boundary aspect of templates. So if you reversed outline literature search section and you find that most examples of a literature search have about 40 pieces of literature that they engage with, and you've already collected about 70 pieces of literature, the template information can really help to say to yourself, okay, yes, maybe it's time to stop collecting more literature at this moment, and let's move on to the drafting stage and see how we're doing. And then we go back. Because like I said, I'm a type of person, I feel like I need to read everything. And if you let me go, I will stay in that literature search section for the longest time possible, because I always want to read more. So having a template can say, okay, Alberto, great, you've got 100, let it go, move on to the next section. And then really focus on, okay, if you need 40, how can we kind of whittle that down before having to read everything? So then Another important thing for writer's block is basically we all experience sometimes, and there are a couple of causes for writer's block. It's completely natural. I want to start off by saying that there's nothing wrong with you if you experience it, if you're stuck in it. But helping to understand basically some of the causes for that can help us then kind of work our way through it here. So possible causes: you're adjusting to a new form of writing here. If you were an undergraduate writing undergraduate essays, and all of a sudden you're in a postgraduate, also the longer forms of a research can really kind of be disorienting and overwhelming at a time. So that is okay. So recognize that you're writing in a new form. Be kind to yourself in that sense. Maybe you've been writing for a reader or readers who have been overly critical or demanding of you in the past. And now as you're writing for them again, this type of basically feedback has kind of stuck in your mind. Remembering negative criticism, and it's kind of closely related, but for writing for a new writer, but you're remembering negative criticism you received in the past from another reader, that can still have some type of negative effect on your writing. Maybe you're working on a short time scale. Basically, you have a lot of unstructured time, and you see that that clock clicking down again. That can be really pressure-inducing as well. And also, there's events happening outside of school as well that can have an effect. So it's important to recognize basically some of the causes, and now thinking about basically working through some writing blocks. What are some things you can do? Basically, often when we experience writer's block, it's pretty much because we as writers ourselves, we're sometimes our own worst critics. We have our worst opinion of our own writing pretty much than anybody else. So make a list of things that you do well. And you might ask a friend or a colleague to kind of help generate this list with you. So here are some possibilities to kind of get you started. You could say, I explain things really well to people. I get people's interest. I have a strong opinion. I'm critical of what I read. So helping to make this list of yourself is to remind you of basically some of the things that you do well already, so that you kind of offset some of these negative opinions that you have of your own writing. Um, Recognize that writing is a complex process. So writing is an attempt to kind of fix meaning on a page, and basically, and your readers know that there's always more that can be said on a topic. And I think that's a helpful thing. When you're writing, you don't have to write to basically fit it out completely. Your writer will always ask, well, could always ask, what about this? And there has to be a point where you say, okay, yes, this is not my magnum opus. This is basically my research project. This is the jumping off point for later research. So knowing that, it can be really helpful. Basically, also think of yourself as an apprentice, and that can be help. So if block apprehension is new, take time to understand situations that you're writing in are also new. In particular, try to figure out what has changed in your writing life. Basically, are you writing in a new format? Are you writing longer papers than before? Are you writing for new audiences? Are you writing on a new subject matter? So it makes sense that when you're having trouble then with writer's blocks, to kind of go through steps a little bit and recognize basically what has changed, and assign it to that, not just because I'm a horrible writer. Recognizing the causes can kind of help you say, okay, yes, this is something that's very situational. I'm an apprentice. I will learn. Writing is an iterative process. I might not get it perfect the first time around. This is why we do our drafting. We get our feedback, and we go through it as a process again. And really important, reward yourself. So when you reach a milestone, reward yourself, because I mean, if you're working hard and you're working hard through a really, really long process and you don't have any points of reward, it can make that writing journey really difficult here. So celebrate your victories, celebrate basically the things that you have done well. If you get a good comment, say, yeah, I did that. And really take time to acknowledge that for yourself, so that you can then build upon that. And then if I said, if like we were saying, if you want to go back and make a template of what you did really well, that for the next assignment, you have something to kind of help guide you. So wanted to prepare for practice here. We're going to do a little bit of generative writing or free writing in this. So for about maybe the next 2 minutes, I want you to think about a section of think about your research project, or one section of your research project that you'd like to develop a little bit more. If you're an undergraduate, think about your supervision essay, or think about maybe a question that you just recently encountered and you are thinking about writing about. So for about next minute and a half, let's get that idea in our head before we kind of have a little bit of practice here. And I'm just going to turn off my mic here. Okay, so hopefully you've got you've thought about something about your research project or a certain section. So now we'd like to have a little bit of free writing time. So for 5 minutes, you're just gonna write about basically that topic without thinking too much. You can start with the prompt, this research is important because, and then just take off. So the idea is that you're gonna take your analytical mind and have it go in the back seat a little bit and start thinking about more idea creation and generation. Let your creative side come out a bit. The only rule is basically we're going to ask you to write as fast as you can. Basically, you can't press delete. We want you just to go into this idea generation thing. If you get stuck, basically pick another different similar word. Don't bother looking up words at this point. You can make little symbols for yourself to come back later, but basically pretty much write for 5 minutes. And then we'll have a little bit of a polish at the end. So I'll start the timer here for 5 minutes, and I'm going to turn off my camera for 5 minutes because I don't want to be like Big Brother looking at you. So 5 minutes, and we'll see how we go from there. Okay, so starting now. So you've got about a minute left. All right, time on 5 minutes. Okay, now for the next 3 minutes, I'd like you to do a little bit of light editing. So move stuff around in your free write. This is not a heavy polishing. Just delete anything that basically doesn't really make sense. Just kind of do some very gentle editing. So 3 minutes starting now. Alrighty, go ahead and bring that to a close. So, how did we do? How was that experience? You can pop it in the chat, or if you'd like to talk on the mic. All right at the whole. Okay. Yes. Anybody like to share how many words that they generated? Always find this as an interesting exercise. 350 words, that's really good. Yes. I like the way you preface that with effective generated 350 words. Thank goodness for Word. Yes. 90. This is okay, great. Great. So is this something that basically wasn't too tiring? No? You could probably redo the process again. It was maybe a little bit of a break. So if we think about that, 350 words, 90 words times 2, that's 700 words. 700 words in one day is pretty good sometimes. 300, yes. If you're writing a master's dissertation, how long is about a master's dissertation? So usually about 7,000, 10,000 words. Some people I think I've heard go up to 15. That can be a bit scary. Yes, but yes. So yeah. So if you thought about this, you generated maybe 750 words, effectively generated 750 words a day, times how many days? Let's say 10 days, you've got almost 7,000 words. I'm really bad at mathematics, so please forgive me if I make some horrible mistakes. But yes, sometimes you've generated, and I think this is quite nice because what we want to get you to do is to kind of generate to give you more time to go back and revise. And often we can get stuck. As I said, it's like I can't generate anything. So by doing an exercise like this, it can help unlock, and I said, put that analytical mind, which says, no, it's got to come out perfect every time. Every sentence has to come out just right. Well, it doesn't necessarily need to come out just right. What you need is you need material to then go refine and distill and basically work with. And so taking that pressure of like, oh my gosh, I don't have anything. Well, now you've got something to work with and you can build off that. So this is another nice little mechanism to kind of help with that. So it can also be helpful if you can't think about basically what to write, is to write the prompts. And this can be quite nice. So basically you can write write about specific, what insights do you have on a particular topic? What does everyone say, and do you agree with it? Why or why not? What's bothering you about this piece of writing or this little section in your writing? Get those ideas out there. What's hard about this section or the chapter? And you can say sometimes, here's my data. Here's my best guess of what's happening and why. So this helps to get your ideas out there in the first place. So if you've done a lot of free writing, then sometimes you can realize, okay, great, free writing is not a problem. I have a lot of words. What do I do with them next? And there's a little bit of basically what I call after the free write. So it can be helpful. Sometimes it can be difficult once you free write to have all these words that are unformed, and to try to go back and revise in that document can be somewhat difficult. So sometimes it's helpful just have a side-by-side write. So you have your document open where you did your free write, open up another blank document, and basically try to distill from one document over to the other. And that can be a good way to help you organize that. You can almost think of it almost like somewhat translating basically your own writing, which puts a different, basically in a different relationship to what you just read there. You could also try a paragraph recipe. And so again, we go back to these templates. Basically, it's to help you organize your thought. So again, it goes back to these type of paragraph acronyms. So text is PI. Here we have MEAL, basically, which is the main point, evidence analysis, and then linking. And you can see here, you're going to read for content, basically, reading for function, not necessarily for content. So trying to fit in basically the function template into your writing, and that's another way to kind of help organize what your free writing material. Another thing, again, use the Manchester Phrase Bank. They have great sections to help, or they're almost essentially templates as well, to help you move from one piece of writing to another. They give you different ways to introduce a topic, to move from one topic to another. So that can be really helpful. And then reverse outline your own free writing. And this can be nice. Basically, go back, highlight the most useful parts of it. You can trim down, that helps you to trim down your writing. and it can be easier to kind of wrestle with that material if you've generated quite a lot of it to help organize that. Last but not least, note that further support is available here at Wolfson College. We're very fortunate. We have a wide array of support available to our students. We have our Wolfson College writing consultants, and these are PhD students that have gone through the process. They are from across the subject matter, and they can help with the mechanics of writing here. If you're struggling with organization or how to decode and supervision as a essay question, or maybe you're struggling with the flow in a certain part of your research project, they're really helpful. They can be really helpful. It is confidential. It's completely free as well, and they're available throughout the term time. So yes. Also book a one-to-one academic skills session with myself or Laura. So as I talked about at the very beginning of this part of the presentation, the skills that we cover are inside the writing process. So Laura does note making and speed reading and time management, and we also do basically searching for literature. Maybe you're having difficulty narrowing down your search terms, or building up a Zotero library to help with your references and working with that. So yes, book a session with us. Also, we have right here, right now at Wolfson on Wednesdays. So if you just need some time to have some structure time to work on your writing, and that can be anywhere in the process, either the reading, note making, or maybe you're just trying to generate text. Come to one of those sessions and write in the company of other people that are in that process as well. And that can be really helpful. It works on the concept of positive peer pressure. So I know I found it really helpful when I was writing my master's dissertation. It's kind of hard to say, okay, I'm going to open up a YouTube video and admire cute cat videos while somebody else is typing away, and we kind of check in with each other. So yes, and also participate in one of our academic writing months activities. We have our write-a-thon coming up next Saturday. Going to do a shout out for Laura, who's giving a workshop on writing an abstract, I think sometime this month as well. So if you haven't written an abstract, definitely go along to that one as well, because that's really great. And yeah, as I said, reach out to us, and we're really helpful. We'll be really glad to be helpful as best we can. Yes. Right. So that's enough for me and my section. Thank you. So Laura, off to you now.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Alberto. Yeah, I think it's really important to think of all the different building blocks that go into the writing process, and dealing with feedback is very much part of that. And as Alberto alluded to, there's lots of times when you come to the writing process and you're being reflective. You're looking back on how things have gone in the past, and you're thinking about how things are going to be working in the future. So we're going to spend about half an hour now thinking about using feedback really constructively. Why do we kind of need to do this? Why are we even bothering to talk about feedback? Sometimes you've submitted an essay and that's the last you want to see of it. It hasn't been a particularly positive process. You're a bit stressed, you're a bit poor for time, and you just kind of want to get it out of the way, and you just want to move on to the next thing. And actually, particularly in the Cambridge system, for some of you, you'll find that you're kind of asked to move on almost immediately. But feedback is a really kind of critical part of the writing process. And the way that we're going to look at it today is to think about feedback literacy. So this isn't just about feedback per se and just taking it, but it's about that ability to read it, to kind of understand it. And that's not always straightforward. As we know, it's different for everybody. Like, some supervisors are super, super helpful. Some people just give you a few kind of throwaway comments. Some people, you don't get much engagement at all. Some people really go to town on kind of the minutiae. So it's not an easy thing to do. And we have to kind of think about feedback differently depending on who's given it to us. But that ability to read it, to understand it, and then to actually use it. And we can kind of break it down in three particular ways. The idea of kind of knowing, what is it that we've got, really reflecting on how it makes us feel. And we're going to pull this apart a little bit, but it's a really kind of emotive thing, particularly if something hasn't gone well, if the feedback isn't particularly positive, that can have a really detrimental effect. And we talk about this a lot in terms of, being in a good place to do reading and note making and writing, actually your kind of physical environment, but also how you feel. If you're really tired, it's really difficult to do something well. If you're feeling really demoralized, it's really difficult to do it well. So being able to take that feedback and use it as positively as possible is hopefully going to make you a more productive academic. But I do want to have that kind of caveat at the bottom that I know it's different for everybody. And so as with all our workshops, this is generic support, but you will have to apply it to your own context. So here's a kind of clear dictionary definition. We get feedback all the time. So it's a feedback about you, about what you're wearing. Someone might say, "Oh, I like your jumper today." It's a little bit of feedback. You might go into the cafeteria and you might, really enjoy the soup, and you might see Charles and say, "Oh, I really enjoyed the soup." We're constantly giving feedback to one another. Oh, Alberto, I've lost the screen share. Share my screen instead, shall I?
Oh, sorry. I think that might have been me. I was still stuck on my slide, so I stopped sharing. I assumed that you were.
That's okay. That's okay. Let me just go back to here.
Present in Teams, the very top.
Yeah, it's not. I'm gonna just do my normal. Oh, okay, it didn't jump to where I wanted it to. Is the grid view going to help me jump there? Where are we? Yes. So the most important thing about getting feedback is that we use it as a basis for improvement. So it's not just about being told something that we've done. That was good or it was bad. Kind of so what? Who cares? The whole point is that we use that for improvement. So definitely feedback is going to highlight issues. If it's feedback, it's telling you about something you did well, something that you didn't do so well. They may, in feedback, if someone's a good marker, they may suggest how you improve and do better, even if something's been good. A really good marker will just push you that little bit further. We can all improve at all levels. Doesn't matter whether you're a foundation year student or you're a junior research fellow or, you're a professor. But of course, occasionally we do have to work out what to do with feedback. It's not always clear where we need to go with it. But I do think it's much more helpful to think instead of feedback, but to think of it as feed forward. So rather than thinking about what we've done, as I said, looking ahead, think about future assessments that you're going to have. Even if you're working on your PhD, just thinking about the next piece of writing that you're going to produce or the next kind of bit of research data that you're going to collect. And yeah, thinking about how we can do better. So it's a reciprocal process. It's something that we're kind of actively engaged in. And that's the thing. It's about kind of taking control of feedback. Sometimes it can feel like feedback something that happens to you, and it's a kind of direct assault on you. Kind of take it, own stuff you've already done, but it's going to help you learn better in the long run. And it's always amazing. I've talked to quite a few academics now who say perhaps in a supervision essay, students will be there and they've talked through their essay, and the supervisor's talking, but they're not doing anything. They're not writing it down. They're not using it for their future learning. They're seeing it as a kind of end point on that essay. Great, thanks. Yeah, I really understood that essay. Now I'm moving on. Never see that. See it as a kind of continual learning thread. And as Alberto said, like one of the most valuable things you can do when you've got writer's block is to think about what you're good at. And so if there's anything that you can take from your feedback, do it. Because you want to emulate that. You want to do it next time around. What you don't want is to kind of forget all the good stuff and then just focus in on the negative bits, and then you kind of lose some of that that territory that you've already gained. It is also helpful to become self-reflective. Like it's really, really easy just to kind of focus on producing content when we're writing and not to think about it as a process. So the more that we can be reflective, the better. And yes, the content is obviously super important and how we communicate it and the rest of it. But ultimately, like this idea of kind of templates that Alberto brought up, if we can kind of take control and think about our role in the production of that content rather than just splurging it out onto a page, then again, it gives us that ability to tweak our processes, to kind of become more nuanced, to identify a great writer, but I do really struggle with that literature section. Or I feel I'm great at kind of collecting literature, like Alberto said, that's like his forte. He loves kind of reading and reading and reading. But then you get to the writing process, you're like, I haven't left myself enough time. Be as critical as you can about the whole process, and then you give yourself time and space to kind of indulge on the content side of things. Also, as I said, sometimes feedback is confusing and unhelpful and vague. This isn't me kind of A4 slides that really kind of take you step by step about how you're going to improve. I totally appreciate it. Can be great, but it can also not not be particularly helpful. Okay, so we're going to move on a little bit. So now I think we've kind of defined what feedback is, and we're going to think of it as feed forward, but to think about the emotional response that we all have to feedback. So here's some sample feedback. And if you've just got a few moments just to kind of scan through it, skim through it, if you're not a fast reader, perhaps just pick one particular paragraph to look at. This is quite detailed feedback. It's quite balanced. You know, this person saying something's good, but you know, you've got those areas for improvement. How would it make you feel? You know, if that was the feedback that you received. Does anyone want to kind of unmute themselves or put a word in the chat? Oh, you can't see it, Amanda. Can you not see my slides at all? Alberto, are you seeing my slides?
Yeah, I could see the how would it make you feel in the feedback. So
Okay, so that's Sarah's
Sarah,
can see
yeah.
it. Okay, Amanda, we will share the slides with you so you can go back through this if for some reason they're not sharing with you. Yeah, Sarah said they're all fixable. Okay, great. So someone, yeah, it's relatively constructive, isn't it? Yeah. So that's something that's a kind of takeaway from this. Okay, you know, didn't go as well as I hoped, but this is something I can actually do about this. But I think it is really important to think about, there's, like we said, you know, if you're feeling tired, if you're feeling pleased with this, but you know, when you submitted it, you felt great, and it's come back like, oh, bit of a shock. Or you might be someone who's generally quite anxious about your work, and so when you get it back, you think, that does confirm some of my concerns. But actually, you know, there's some takeaways from that as well. You know, whether or not you trust the marker. And definitely, I've had those experiences with students coming into my office saying, oh, I've got this really strict marker, you know, they always pull out the bad things, or, you know, this is person, they don't really understand what I'm doing, or whatever it is. And that's going to affect the way that you interact with that. You know, if it's somebody you really trust and you kind of really value their opinion, you might take all that as, oh, this is really helpful. Oh, thank you. You know, this is going to like move my learning forward. So again, it's really tough, but sometimes trying to be as dispassionate as you can, trying to give yourself a little bit of a break, especially if it didn't go so well, and then coming back to that feedback as you start the writing process for your next piece of written work and going through saying, okay, you know, try and put the emotions to one side. I'd be quite interested to know, so if anyone can think of their last piece of feedback, perhaps an essay that you got back recently, if you submitted anything to your supervisor, perhaps just put a single emoji in the chat for how you felt. Oh, so Louis didn't feel so good. Oh, the last bit of feedback. That's quite a sad face. A light bulb moment for Amanda, so perhaps made her realise something hadn't thought about. Thoughtful from Sarah. Okay, yeah, but a kind of a range of emotions. And I think that's really important to recognize as well the impact that can have on us. You know, sometimes if we thought something went well, oh, a high five from Cheryl. Thingy, oh, a little tear, but a kind of happy face. I'm not sure what that emoji means. That's a bit of both, maybe. But you know, sometimes we feel happy. You think that's great, that went really well, so I don't need to engage with that feedback. You know, I don't need to learn anything. I just kind of keep going. Yeah, if you're sad, you might not want to engage. You might be dismissive if you can't see the kind of application of the feedback you got from the last essay to the next marker who's reading it. Might be just because kind of tonally the piece is different. It might be that one was a kind of compare and contrast piece, and others like totally open discussion piece. You think, well, you know, the feedback's not going to be super relevant there. But it can definitely impact on kind of the way that we engage with things. So as we said at the start, feedback in and of itself isn't particularly useful. It's the kind of so what. It's what we do with it that really, really matters. So do capture the main point. So if it's written, again, when you've got kind of the headspace to be a bit more dispassionate, go through and capture what are the main points. If it's verbal, like I said, if you're being given verbal feedback, write it down. Please try and capture it in some way, shape, or form. It's really easy to leave a supervision and think, oh, I can't remember what was said there. It was generally positive, but I'm not really sure. Or, that was actually relevant to somebody else, not really relevant to me. But then when you come to write up, you might find that you're having the same problem that they had. Perhaps put them into two columns, the positives and the negatives. Like we said, feedback is as much about continuity as it is change. So identify the strengths in your work and make sure that you replicate them in your next piece, and then think what the areas that I can work on. And make them visible. Pop literally a series of post-it notes on a wall, or a kind of piece of A4 paper with a line down the middle that you pin up somewhere when you come to that writing process. Because it is so easy to get caught up in the content. Like, I've just got to get this idea across. I've got to do this. And we lose sight sometimes of that process. And a lot of the feedback that students receive is about the process of writing, or the kind of technicalities or the mechanics of it. Sometimes it's conceptual. Sometimes people didn't quite grasp a concept. They didn't quite reference enough people. But even then, that's still kind of fixable. That still gives you an indication that you need to spend more time understanding the concept, or you do need to read a little bit more widely. It's not just about the kind of context of that the content of that particular essay that you wrote. So why do we do that? It's not to put ourselves through the pain of kind of rewriting an essay that we feel didn't go so well. It's so that we can identify areas of development. Now, depending on which stage you're at, if you're at an undergraduate level, you've got the kind of luxury of time a little bit to kind of perhaps pick one of those areas of development and really focus on it for your next essay. So keep going with all the strengths. And then this time round, I'm going to focus on, let's say, flow and argumentation. Or I'm really going to focus on trying to read a little bit more widely. I'm going to build in a bit more reading time. Or I'm going to do less kind of regurgitation. When I take my notes, I'm going to make them more active. I'm going to make little summaries at the end. So I'm putting stuff into my own words. I'm doing a bit of pre-writing as I go. Try and pick one thing. If you're doing an MPhil, that might be slightly different. Some of our masters, I know you just have to submit an essay. But even then, potentially there's an opportunity for you to really focus on one thing at a time. Try not to get overwhelmed by feedback. Excuse me. And how are you going to do it? Kind of build up a bit of an action plan. Are you going to speak to your supervisor and say, thank you for raising this, but I'm not sure I totally understand what you mean by that? Are you going to meet with a librarian or with a writing consultant? Is there a training course you can go on? If it's something really basic, you think, actually, I must crack, learning how to use Zotero. I'm going to do that. Is there a book? We've got hundreds of books in the library about how to improve academic skills, all different areas. There's loads of podcasts out there, YouTube videos. You can get some ideas, in just 5 to 15 minutes about something that you can improve on. Lots of people sharing their experience and best practice. Why do we struggle though? So there's often reason, Alberto talked about this with kind of writer's block. Why do we find using feedback difficult? And there are a number of reasons. One is language, what they're actually asking us to do. And there's a link here on this slide to just explaining some of those kind of terms that frequently come up in feedback. Sometimes it's not totally clear what you do with it. Just kind of, like I said, try and be as dispassionate as possible. So when we go back to that feedback earlier on, where was it, Sarah? Yeah, said that they're all feasible points. So like we said, go through your piece of feedback, pull out what are the comments they're actually making. There's lots of things here. Unreferenced arguments. Okay, so that's on my list. Make sure I reference my arguments a bit more. I relied too much on reviews and summaries. Okay, so I'm going to have to go out and read some of those original sources a little bit more. Something at the end here, proofreading. Okay, that means I'm going to have to work all the way backwards and build in some time. So I know that I'm not going to literally hit the full stop and submit my essay. I'm going to have to, give myself an hour off, come back with a fresh pair of eyes, give myself time to kind of proofread my essay. So that's why it's important to do it at the beginning of the process of your next piece of work, because some of these things are going to take time. Like we said, if you've identified that you need to spend a bit of time reading a book or watching a a podcast, listening to a podcast, or meeting with somebody, you've got to plan, several days ahead before you can do that. So it's much better to do it before you start your next piece, rather than kind of having your feedback and writing at the same time, and then it all kind of gets on top of you. This is quite a nice little flow chart. If you do find it difficult to kind of work through in a systematic way, thinking, am I ready to deal with it? As we said, sometimes no, you're not ready to deal with it. You need to give yourself a day or so before you approach it. Do I understand it? Is the meaning clear? Do I know what to do to improve? And then to write an action plan. And if you don't know what to do to improve, like we said, ask for help. So I don't know if anyone's got some feedback to hand, or they can remember anything from something they've recently submitted, but I'll perhaps just give you a minute or two to think of something that came up in that feedback. Draw a little table like this, identify the target. Do you know straight away what you could do to rectify that? And how will you know when you've achieved that target? So there might be something like really, really definable, like we said, proofreading. I will know if I've proofread or not because I would have built in time and I would have actually been through my essay. But is there actually a kind of skill in there, or is there something that's kind of hard to define, something a little bit more nebulous that it's difficult to work out? Because again, this is something we talked about when we did the note making, or we talk about when we do time management, about being really specific, about knowing when you've got somewhere, rather than just setting out, right, I'm going to write a whole new essay and I hope it's going to be good. Rather than that kind of hopefulness, actually having structure, actually having targets for yourself. Again, stepping back from the content and looking more at the process. So I just give you like 1 or 2 minutes just to think of something and how you might improve it for your next piece of work. Okay, was that easy to do? Easy to do? Think of something that you know that you need to work on, that you need to improve? And was it easy to identify how you could improve it? Either feel free to unmute or just perhaps pop something in the chat quickly. Or people are writing. I mean, I think this is the thing, a reflective writer is the best sort of writer. Louis, easy to identify the issue and you think you know what to do. Okay, that's great. An action plan is useful. Yeah, it's just so easy, I think, to get caught up in the task and the product. I'm trying to produce an essay. I've produced an essay. Phew. Rather than kind of learning as we go and seeing the whole writing process as a continual learning process. And it happens, like we said, at all levels. This is right through from people starting their first degree right through to doing more advanced degrees, or those who are kind of permanent academic staff. We all learn all the time, but only by being able to look back on what we've done and think about moving forward. What I was going to say here, I just forgot to move the slide on. So, oh, yep. felt it was positive even though it was negative. That's the important approach for me. Yeah, I think that's it. It's just trying to take something positive from when things haven't gone well. And it's totally normal for things not to go well. I mean, that's why we have so many support systems in college. It's like it's never meant to be a smooth road. There's probably an expectation that we're just going to hit the ground running and we're just going to go from strength to strength. It's really there's going to be lots of potholes on the way. But the more that we can take from those experiences and see them as kind of positive learning encounters, the better it is for us all. So if you think that this is something that could work for you, obviously you can develop your own templates, but also on the LibGuide as well, we have a series of templates that can help you. So this is dealing with a kind of individual piece of feedback, but also dealing with feedback from across the term. So if you have the luxury of a kind of a bit of time over the vacation to kind of stop, pause, go back over everything that you've produced this term and think about, okay, right, what am I going to do going forward? How am I going to start the new term? What am I going to do differently this time around? And as we said, it could be the actual writing side of things, but it could be working right back to that initial, how am I going to approach reading lists? How am I going to, do my note making? What's my learning environment going to be like? I know the problem is here, I was really stressed and I was working really, really quickly and I was doing it in the middle of the night and that wasn't ideal. Going forward, I'm going to try and work in this particular way and see if that has a better impact. So I'll share the link in the chat actually to that as well. Seem to have got rid of it. Hopefully most of you are familiar with the Wolfson College LibGuide by now, and this is the kind of the top level link. But under wider academic skills, there is a link to dealing with feedback on there. Okay, so here we are at 11:30. So just by way of summary, try and use feedback as feed forward. Think about it in a really positive way. Oh, Cheryl, I'm just going to read your thing. One significant learning point for recent submission at a different university. Check the submission link in advance of the deadline as the link didn't work. Brilliant. Okay, that's a takeaway. And that is something that, although it would probably stay with you, that sort of feeling, it's actually worth writing down, isn't it? 3 or 4 days before the deadline, just double check, what's the process here? What am I required to do? What's the format I meant to submit it in? Was I meant to email it or was I going to drop it into, Moodle? Where was I going to put it? Yeah, that's something we can definitely learn from. Think about the fact that feedback does make us feel things, that we do have this kind of emotional response to it, that it's important wherever we can to kind of recognize those, but then step back from them, identify actions, put them into practice, and then think, did it work? There's actually that kind of further stage. We're not just feeding forward to the very next essay, but we're kind of reflecting on, I set out to improve the layout of my essay, and I did it, and I actually got a comment on it, and that was really, really nice. Little things like that, or it didn't work. Why not? What could I do better? Perhaps this time I do need to talk to my supervisor. Perhaps I'm misunderstanding. Okay, so we'd be really, really grateful for any feedback that you have from this session, things that you thought worked well, things that perhaps didn't go so well, or you would have liked us to included that we didn't. But really for us, the big one is, what might you take away from this session? Is there any single takeaway, something that you might actually put into practice? We'd be really intrigued to hear about that, because for us, that's kind of helps demonstrate that what we're doing might have an impact on the way that you're learning. Alberta, could I ask you to stick the link into the chat, please? Because that's probably not super catchy, the one that's on the slide there. And what we'll do is we'll circulate the recording of this session. I will stop recording now.